President Susan Furman, Provost Tom James, fellow recipients Paula Rosen and Matt Patinsky, let me thank you for this wonderful occasion and this great honor and the chance to be with you today. It really is a thrill. And something I learned this morning from the birthplace of happy birthday, let me say happy birthday to Teachers College, 125th birthday, an institution built to last and built for the future. And it really is a deep honor and a tremendous joy to be part of this institution, to be a neighbor, a partner, and someone who can help celebrate the accomplishments of Teachers College and learn from the remarkable faculty and students and all of the collaborations that we have together. And I'm delighted that Peter Coleman will be up here shortly also with me when we have some questions, answers, and comments from all of you. I'm really thrilled with the honor, but also you have to understand that as an economist, I'm thrilled that you're asked anywhere these days. The best definition that I've recently heard of an economist is that it's a person who has been put on the planet to make astrologers look good. I think it's a pretty fair assessment. My favorite definition of an economist is a person that when he or she sees that something works in practice, tries to find out if it works in theory. And there is a corollary to that Morton Deutsch made known and famous, that there is nothing so practical as a good theory. And indeed, I think actually both of those points are right, that true knowledge is a reflective interaction of theory and practice. I rather like the idea of a good economist being someone who is looking at what is happening in the world, trying as best to understand it. Understanding often does mean putting it in an abstract or theoretical context for a purpose, partly so that it can be taught and transmitted, partly so that it can be replicated and scaled up. Because a good idea, a good practice that can make a difference and that can help people's lives is something that we need to dearly treasure and make sure that it reaches all of those in need. I want to talk about one part of this today, though I think Matt Patinsky may rightly be the one to speak on this, and that is the role of information technology in not only education, but in a very broad context that all of us are part of and that will really define our future in the years ahead, and that is sustainable development. What is the role of information technology in this remarkable, unique challenge of sustainable development? What is sustainable development? That's a good place to start. Sustainable development, I would suggest, is an unprecedented challenge facing humanity, something that we really have not faced before, certainly not in the nature, the scale, the character that we face it now. It builds on a basic concept that is somewhat familiar for society, and that is the concept of what could be summarized as the triple bottom line of society. On the one hand, we do want economic progress. We believe that material well-being matters. It certainly matters for health, for longevity, for access to education, for the ability to benefit from the technologies and breakthroughs and knowledge of modern life. And especially when it comes to economic progress, fighting extreme poverty, the kind of poverty that threatens lives daily of millions and millions of people, is of course paramount. The second pillar, the second bottom line, as it were, is environmental sustainability. This is, in a way, something new for us because humanity always has faced the challenge of living sustainably with the natural environment, we're part of it. And for millions of years, we've had to manage fire, and we've had to manage local ecology. And at times, the environment has failed, or it has been abused, and it has caused people to have to move on, or it has threatened whole civilizations. But never before has the challenge of environmental sustainability threatened the entire planet. This is something new. It's a unique reality of our time. The third part of that triple bottom line is social inclusion, and something that I think is more urgent than ever in our own country. And that is the need for all of us to live in a society that is inclusive and not deeply divided by class, by race, by ethnicity, by even ideological divisions. And this is something that America is failing at the moment, but it is a failure that is shared widely. Societies in many parts of the world are becoming much less equal, more seriously divided, often leaving the poor completely invisible and without the means to gain a foothold in their societies. This triple bottom line is important. It is, I believe, the essence of making a good life for the members of a society. It is the path, I think, to what Aristotle called eudaimonia, which is the good life and the purpose of a good life. But it's a challenge that is of an unprecedented nature for us now, and this is the main point that I want to remind us of. We've just experienced the beautiful springtime in February, March, and April of New York. While it often has been a pleasure to have a snowless winter, we should understand what a shock it is and what it really suggests. It suggests a planet that is absolutely out of kilter at human hands. The geologists have given it a name. They call it the Anthropocene. That means the geologic epoch in which Earth itself is under the forcings, they call it, of humanity, the anthropos. And what humanity is doing with now 7 billion of us on the planet and an average throughput per person of $10,000 per person, meaning a $70 trillion worldwide annual production, is unprecedented and still not understood, and certainly not reflected in our actions, in our politics, in our human understanding. It's come upon us so fast that we can't really appreciate it. I have the experience, almost by nature of working on problems of poverty, of seeing the cutting edge of these changes, because when climate changes, it is the places with the most fragile climates that change most dramatically first. And the past 6 months, while the winter here eluded us, what was happening halfway around the world in the drylands of Africa was an intensification of drought, hunger, and conflict. And this now stretches from West Africa in Mali, where our project was actually overrun by a rebellion in the north, and people in our project had to flee on the Niger River by canoe for 2 days to get out of the fighting and get away from the area, to the Horn of Africa in the east. What we have is human-induced changes of our climate leading to sharp declines of rainfall, increased hunger, population migration, and conflict. This is blind to us, naturally. Mali is not front-page news, and when we do talk about Somalia, it's the spare article about a refugee camp or about piracy in the Red Sea, but it's hardly in front of us. But what's in front of the people there is the shocking dislocations of a planet that has turned against them in ways that obviously had nothing to do with them, that they can't understand, and that they don't have the tools, the technology, the buffers of wealth or income or knowledge or political power or social voice to be able to confront. And millions of people, therefore, are put at risk. And by the way, these things happen so fast now that it's very hard even for me, who's trained in this and experienced in this for 30 years, to even keep a foot in place in the rapidity of these developments. In January, I was in Mali celebrating our project, having a very nice evening dinner with the Prime Minister under the stars, thinking about what a beautiful country this is. And the governor of the district where our project is located was telling me that he was seeing increasing violence, and could I help to mobilize some bore wells for the area, because the nomad populations, which are livestock herders, couldn't find water for their livestock, and they were trying to get to the river. To get to the river meant crossing the farmlands. There was conflict between the nomadic populations and the settled populations, an old story of humanity, but dramatically intense. And I said, sure, I'll help. And 6 weeks later, before I could do anything, the governor was gone, the government was gone, the project was gone, and the real events had taken their course. So this is a scale of drama and unprecedented dimension for us, and we are going to have to do our parts from all parts of society to address a challenge that we've never seen before. Now, technology plays a double role in all of this, and this is, of course, one of the great ironies, maybe a triple role. First, technology made the modern world. The essence of a modern economy is advances of technology, and it was the technological revolutions of the 18th century that made industrialization, and then from there made the high-tech world in which we live and find ourselves today. But the second reflection of that, of course, is that it was technology that made so many of the problems that we face today. Who knew, with the advances of electricity and the great discoveries of how to use a fossil fuel like coal to produce energy in unprecedented scale, to do work in unprecedented scale, to build cities of unprecedented scale, and technological advances of unimaginable design, that the consequence of that, of greenhouse gas emissions, would someday threaten the entire planet so fundamentally? Who could have guessed? Even the great discoverer of the principles of greenhouse gases, who first measured them quantitatively, a Swedish Nobel laureate chemist in 1896, who by hand over 18 months calculated what the doubling of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would mean for humanity, and brilliantly got it right, showing the power of genius, said, but don't worry, it will take 700 years to double the amount of carbon. He was trained in chemistry, not economics, but of course, even an economist would not have had a clue as to what was going to come, and it will be less than a century, well under a century, for that doubling to take place. Who would have thought that when Haber and Bosch in 1908 discovered how to take atmospheric nitrogen and fix it as ammonia through a catalytic industrial process, and thereby feed the planet with nitrogen-based fertilizer, that one of the consequences would be that population would rise from about 1.5 billion then to 7 billion now, because of this stupendous ability to increase food supply, and that with 100 million metric tons of nitrogen used to produce the food for those 7 billion, we're poisoning more than 100 major rivers and estuaries around the world. Who would have thunk it? Who would have known that when the Green Revolution was discovered by one of my heroes, Norman Borlaug, in the improved seed varieties that he developed in the 1950s in Sonora, Mexico, which turned out to work just very well in the Punjab of India, and thereby enable India to escape from what had seemed to be its inevitable cycles of famine. That one side effect, now 50 years later, is that 25 million bore wells have been dug in the Gangetic Plains, and the water table is collapsing, and water stress combined with India's population explosion combined with climate change threatens now the livelihoods and the ability of India to feed itself in the decades ahead. That's the second side of technology. It has led people to say we need to go back to a simpler age. Alas, whether that is right or wrong, there is no path in that direction. We're committed on our path because, just to make it very explicit, if we abandon nitrogen-based fertilizers, as some people would like us to do, the estimate is that we would be unable to feed about 3 billion people on the planet today who depend on reactive nitrogen created in chemical processes to grow the grains that keep them alive. So I don't think that there is the illusion of the simpler life, though we crave it in certain ways. But we have to understand this third dimension of technology. We need it, because we need it to solve the very problems that we have cornered ourselves in, and we need to do it in a thoughtful way. And incidentally, working in communities that don't have electricity, that don't have modern technology, you don't want it for yourselves, you don't want it for your children. I work in plenty of what used to be offline, off-grid communities, and the children die, and the water is unsafe, and the food spoils, and the hunger is pervasive. And it's not the kind of life that any of us wants and that any of us could really imagine recommending for anybody else. But the question is how to turn technology to our benefit and our continuing benefit at a time when the planet is so crowded and so much under stress. Let me take this one part of this big issue, it's a vast issue, and talk about information technology. That itself is a vast issue, but let me mention some of the ways that information and communications technology breakthroughs, which are the most wondrous of our time, can make it possible to find that pathway to sustainable development in the 21st century, that pathway to actually ending poverty, having environments that are safe for humanity and safe for nature, and having societies that are inclusive. And this really comes to this question of seeing things working in practice and trying to find out if they work in theory. One of our most fun and interesting projects is a rather major one at the Earth Institute called the Millennium Villages. And this is an effort across Africa to use advanced technologies to break the poverty trap in rural villages of hunger and disease initially, and to see what information technology really can do, take the lessons, design new approaches, and then scale up those approaches when they prove successful. I regard information technology as the single most powerful tool that we have in this project. Absolutely amazing, and incidentally, completely unexpected for me, which shows you how hard it is even to see ahead, at least for me, even 2 or 3 or 5 years ahead when you're enmeshed even in this kind of problem solving. We started the project in 2004 in Western Kenya, and we got the community together, and I asked a number of questions. Of course, there was no electricity at the time, nothing like it. But I also asked, how many of you in a room like this, although there were no lights and there was no electricity in an open schoolroom, in fact, how many of you have a phone? Not one hand went up. How many of you made a phone call recently? Not one hand went up. How many of you made a phone call this year from someplace? About 5 hands went up. How many of you have ever made a phone call? Maybe 1 in 10 in the room. That was 2004. If you go there today, how many of you have a phone? All hands will go up. They will hold up their mobiles. Often nicer than mine. And not everyone has a phone, but the cell phone penetration just in those 7.5 years since that meeting has probably reached 40% of the households in this community. Now, they're using these phones for mobile banking, something that hasn't yet come to Manhattan. They have something called M-Pesa. They can go to a shop, they can pay with their phone, they can exchange money, they can receive money transfers from abroad on their phone. This is a true leapfrog compared to what we know. And in New York, our connections are getting better. They don't drop every 2 blocks. But in this community, they really work extraordinarily well. So this is something that was not even imaginable. Now, what does it mean for fighting poverty? Of course, it means the end of isolation. It means the chance that you can call an ambulance. It means the chance you can call a clinic or a community health worker. And one of the things we've done is help to train local villagers to be community health workers, the kind of barefoot doctor that you know of from China, but which now translates in a modern, trained way. And one of the transformations that is so riveting and wonderful to see is that the great scourge of malaria can be brought under control now by community health workers empowered by mobile phones, expert systems to help them on diagnosis and drug regimens, and backpacks that carry rapid diagnostic tests and the life-saving medicines. And so we're seeing a dramatic drop in a disease that used to routinely claim the lives of children in this community. ICTs are fighting poverty by bringing, of course, the internet into classrooms. Classrooms that did not have walls and electricity, but now have a solar panel and an array of computers, wireless broadband that is coming, and with wireless broadband, the connection of kids to the world. Places that had no books now have potentially, if we think through all of the things that can be done, extraordinary advances in access to every kind of information and curricula. Farmers now have the chance for precision agriculture, for advice, for calling where their markets are for their goods. We've developed in the engineering school just across the street a prepay solar power system so that small microgrids of solar power are now available. And what's the biggest demand for electricity in rural households? Number one demand, absolutely, to charge your mobile. Number two is a light bulb. Number three is an appliance. And our wonderful engineering team, headed by Professor Vijay Modi across the street, has developed an unending range of new IT-empowered appliances. Let me turn quickly to what IT can mean not only in the fight against poverty, but in the fight for sustainability. We know that if we are going to achieve sustainable development, it means shifting to a fundamentally new kind of energy system, one especially that draws on renewable energy, intermittent energy sources, that relies on electric vehicles rather than internal combustion engine, and that uses a lot less energy through efficiency of our buildings, structures, homes, and the like. Smart grids, smart buildings, smart metering, smart mobility will be part of all of that. One of the exciting things we're doing at the Earth Institute is to have brought a coalition of consortium of IT companies and automotive companies together to design and build a self-driving small urban vehicle that will be tested in Manhattan and also will be tested in a new residential community in Florida in the coming years. As our chief engineer on that project says, since it's dangerous to text while driving, stop driving, let the car drive itself so you can continue texting. With IT technologies, this is absolutely possible. Google, of course, has its cars all over California without drivers in them. Take a look sometime. There's often someone behind the wheel, just not touching the wheel. These technologies, I believe, will spread. And finally, let me say that for social inequality as well, the potential of information technologies to be a great equalizer, I think, is extraordinarily powerful. The fact that we can all be part of the global information network and that even the poorest places in the world will have wireless broadband available to them within a short period of time is a phenomenal opportunity for these communities. When we focus on education, and I'm so thrilled of the leadership of Teachers College and all the seminars this afternoon on this question, I think the potential is absolutely mind-boggling and thrilling. In the villages, we have a project called Connect to Learn, which first connects the schools to the internet backbone, connects the girls to the schools, because ensuring that the girls in the community continue in education is probably the most decisive way to break the intergenerational transmission of poverty of all, and connects kids from Africa to kids in other parts of the world, including New York City. And we had a read-along recently of a school in Uganda and a school in Greenwich, Connecticut. Quite interesting. And the kids talked to each other, and the African kids asked the Connecticut kids, "Did you milk the cow before coming to school?" And the Connecticut kids asked, "Who drove you to school in the morning?" And it was quite a meeting of the minds. And the kids' eyes were completely open. And if you think about the potential to really educate children about the reality of globalization, what can be better than having kids around the world directly connected with each other and learning in that way? We're doing that in our teaching programs as well. I'm sure you are. We have something which I really love. We need your help to make it even better and to think about the potential. We have something called a global classroom in our new Masters of Development practice. Once a week, Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. in New York and 8 p.m. in Beijing. And in between, in all of the rest of the time zones from New York, going east to Africa, Europe, the Middle East, South Asia, and East Asia, we have 24 universities on live virtual classroom together so that we can have a lecture from any part of the world, and kids in all, our students in all parts of the world can partake of it. I think it is the future of education, because this way we can have someone from China tell us about China, and someone from Africa tell us about Africa, and the finest minds from any place. They don't have to be in a studio, they don't have to be in a classroom, they just have to be in front of their Skype, wherever they might be, being part of this global learning experience. And the ability to use that then for crowdsourcing solutions for sustainable development, I think will be our true ace in the hole. We are past the age when there will be top-down solutions for any of these problems, not to mention the fact that our governments are utterly paralyzed and cannot catch up in real time and need fundamental reorganization because they're not equipped and organized to handle this complexity of challenge. And each of the solutions for sustainable development needs to be downscaled in its way as well. How can this be done? We need local solutions supported by global knowledge. And that is the crowdsourcing, the Wikipedia of sustainable development, the ability to bring minds from all over the world together on creative and constructive problem solving. But, and I'll just end here, like all technologies, this one too will no doubt have its unintended consequences, and we should think about those. I love information technology, so it was a little hard for me to think of, and I'm sure I missed what the dangers will be, but I came up with 5 Ds for us to watch out for. Obviously, number 1 is distraction. It is kind of amazing. I was in Starbucks a couple of days ago. 3 friends were together, 3 young women, not looking at each other, talking to each other, everyone just on their phone, sitting side by side, having a wonderful coffee date. So there is a certain risk of degrading what the word friend means, and a certain possibility of degrading our interactions through distraction. Second D is the risk of division, of course, the digital divide, the divisions by ideology, by class, and so forth. Third is the risk of depersonalizing our relationships as well. Online education, yes, but it must be blended with the human and the face-to-face and the direct contact. Fourth, I would say, is diversion. By that I mean the manufacture of tastes, all of the imagery that has gotten so completely out of hand because we're overwhelmed by imagery. To get anyone's attention now, the level of outrage, shock, vividness, explicitness needs to be orders of magnitude beyond what it used to be. If you ride a cab, these ads that we see in the back seat of the cabs are just pornography these days. By the way, a jean ad is not a jean ad anymore. It's not having a jeans ad most of the time. And this is, I think it's actually because we see so much of this imagery. And finally, I would say the fifth, the D that we have to be worried about, I call it divulgence of private information. We really have a privacy issue that is very severe. So in closing, we need to use these technologies. They're powerful, they can be enormously creative, they can connect to the world. But to do so, we will have to keep our balance. And ultimately, and I think this is my bottom line, the biggest threat of all that we have in our society and in the world society is the question of virtue and values. Because the real crisis that we have in the United States is not an economic crisis. The real crisis is not a financial crisis. The real crisis we have is a crisis of values. Can we find and keep the underlying values of community, of participation, of empowerment through knowledge, of a commitment to deliberation, of compassion, altruism, moderation, and a belief in our common fate, because it's going to be those values and those values alone that will be completely essential to see us through. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Sachs. I have to say that I'm always inspired by the ferociousness of your intellect, the courage of your work. You, I know, put yourself in harm's way, and that's rare for an academic. And just,
I don't try to, by the way.
but your inspiring words, I'm sure, have the audience appreciates them immensely. We've collected several questions from the audience. I don't know how much time we have for. We have about 10 minutes,
Great.
so these are questions that have come from the audience. The first question is submitted by Charles Greenberg, and he asked, he said, the promise of the OLPC, the one laptop per child project, turned out to be somewhat unsustainable. What did we learn from that experience, positive and otherwise?
I was on a video conference with the California group at UCLA about sustainable renewable energy technologies. And the entrepreneur on the screen was talking to the students, and he said, go out, start your business, and it will fail. And then start another business. That one will fail too. And then start a third business. That one will succeed. And I think the one laptop per child, in a way, it failed in some specific sense, but it succeeded also in another sense. It was because Nicholas Negroponte is very creative and very vivid advocate. He made people aware that there's the potential now of these technologies to make a difference. And I think that his engineering helped, but then it got superseded by other approaches. In the end, I think it was a constructive step, but the dynamics are so fast right now. Don't expect any specific one of your applications to be the perfect hit. Mm-hmm. The world is really dynamic now. Try to add a piece that's going to add a piece that's going to add a piece. We're completely revamping our mobile health technologies by moving everything from mobiles to smartphones now and different applications, because who could have thought 2 years ago that you could afford in villages a smartphone application? Now the prices have plummeted and the possibilities are expanded. So that's what I would say in general about this range of technology. Moore's law not only means the prices will go down, it means your model will get obsolete very fast.
Very good. So just staying on the theme of children, what can we do to develop awareness, for example, of overconsumption and sensitivity in the young, and are you giving any attention to that?
I think we all know, you know better than we, but even the economists figured it out, that early childhood development, first of all, I want to just say age 0 to 6 is the critical maker of kids even being ready to come to school and to thrive. And in our country, it is the biggest shock of all of our society, how many kids we leave behind from their earliest years. It's unimaginable, actually, that we have more than 20% of our kids growing up in poverty. We don't really care in a way. We do, maybe, but society is not acting on this. And the single biggest difference, in my opinion, between the social democracies of Northern Europe, which in my book are the most successful societies in the world in putting all these pieces together, and us, is that Scandinavia has understood invest in your children, and invest in your children from the first day, and invest in all of your children. And this, I just want to say in general, is, I think, what we're missing here. And by the way, as the teachers have gotten bashed by certain of the so-called reform movements and the attacks on teachers' unions and so forth, which I regard as so crazy for a society to go after its teachers, it's mind-boggling to me that we have this. It's a kind of crudeness that I think has an ulterior purpose, and that is that our schools are in jeopardy because our society is in jeopardy. And people want to find the cheap way. And they say, the cheap way, break the union, attack the teacher. But by the time the kids are in these years, already the kind of life experience that the poor kids have experienced has left them so far behind that this is completely missing the point. So that may not have been your question, but that's my answer, which is that what we need to do, of course, is from the earliest ages make sure that our kids are in safe, secure, low stress, and cognitively stimulating environments, and to do that for all our kids.
Very good. I have a tough question from Allison Price Rome, and it has to do with, to some degree, the unintended consequences argument that you spoke a little bit of earlier about regarding IT. her question is, how do your arguments compare to those in the white savior industrial complex argument? So this is an argument recently which is suggesting that Americans, I think they couple you with Nick Kristof and others who believe going into Africa and working in Africa directly is the major solution to Africa, and in a way that's not perhaps sensitive enough to local indigenous practices and leadership. So she was just asking, how do your interventions, particularly with the Millennium Village Project, respond to that?
Yeah, let me tell you just one quick story, and then I'll make a more general point. We work a lot with Ericsson as our partner in information technology, and they, because of broadband, wireless, and the potential, and they brought in what we're using in the Connect to Learn project, a kind of monitor, very low-cost monitor that all the kids get and can be manufactured $25 to $50, and you don't load in the software because everything's on the cloud, and it's a very clever system. And I said, gee, that really is a clever system. Congratulations. And they said, yes, we bought it from the Indian company Novation. It was totally an India-made product. It wasn't, quote, the white man's transfer of technology. It was absolutely what is sometimes called south-to-south transfers by people who don't look at maps, by the way, because it's a pretty strange locution. But in any event, the world is filled with spread of technology in different places, and the idea that one part of the world, the United States, is going to save another part of the world is wrong. It's not at all the motivating philosophy of what we do. The motivating philosophy is that we need a global network of problem solving and global commitment to these issues. Being an American should not disqualify you from participating in this problem solving. It also, of course, does not give anybody the right to impose any solutions whatsoever. In our projects, it is absolutely the core tenet. There is no expatriate on the ground role. Everything is led by Africans, actually by nationals in these villages, and the core of the effort is overseen by two regional centers, one that used to be in Bamako and quickly moved out to Dakar last month, and one in Nairobi. The Bamako-Dakar Center is headed by a wonderful Fulani agro-pastoralist named Amadou Niang. The Nairobi Center is one of our Columbia University research centers of the worldwide network, headed by Dr. Balai Begashaw, who was Ethiopia's agriculture minister for 7 years. And this is all to say, in this world, you partner. And you partner as part of global problem solving. The idea that the motivation is this false model that maybe someone attacks one for, of thinking of a savior complex, is a huge mistake. And we shouldn't allow that kind of rhetoric to stop a more basic human aspiration, which is to share, to cooperate, and to try to help.
Fantastic. Thank you. So we have just one final question. Given the exponential explosion and rise of IT around the world, what do you anticipate will be the role of brick and mortar schools 20 years from now?
Yeah.
Will we still be here?
We'll be here, but we'll be doing very different things, I think. I don't know if it'll be in 20 years and exactly how it will roll out, but I do think our sector and our technology is subject to the same disruptive change that has taken place in music, in the arts, in book publishing, in scientific research, and in everything else. It is a stunning reality and it is a reality and a good one, that a professor can teach 150,000 students, as the Stanford duo in artificial intelligence did last fall. It is true that a lot of what we have done traditionally is talking heads in a way that can be streamed and watched. And I think we shouldn't be abashed about that. And I like the idea that anybody in the world should be able to access information that is virtually free to replicate, and that this is a tremendous empowerment and a tremendous replicator and diffuser of knowledge. And I feel also in my own classroom, I didn't feel too much technological change. My poor students would probably confirm that. For the first 27 years of my 32 years of teaching. Maybe I wasn't completely keeping up with things, but I did go from overhead transparencies to PowerPoint. But I still basically stood in front of the class and talked. And it's only in the last 3 years that everything, I feel, has changed, and the ground really is shaking. And the most recent class I taught was jointly with Harvard and Sciences Po, and another one, Open Classroom. And you just feel, gee, I have to ask my 16-year-old constantly, how do you do something? Because her school is a lot more teched up than my classroom, that's for sure. In which she's doing foreign languages, she's sending in voice files to her teacher, and she's listening on voice files back, and her homework assignment are all PDFs that are edited by whatever program they're using in the classroom on whatever tablets or computers they have. So I'm sure that things are changing tremendously. Thank God it's still nice to be together, and human contact and the human interactions are, of course, vital and also the most pleasant part of life. We shouldn't forget pleasant in life, not just survival. And so we're going to be here. We're going to be teaching. We're going to be meeting. But my guess is that what students will be doing lifelong learning that is convenient for them from many places, and maybe they'll come for a weekend. Maybe they'll come for a week every 2 months. Maybe they'll have a very open process. Maybe they'll be able to stop in whichever part of the world in our frequent classroom program we're aligned in, like our frequent mile programs of One World Alliances. So I think that there will be a pretty deep reshaping of education that will mix, that will blend, in the jargon, the online and the human. And I think the nature of that blending will find many, many creative forms. And I think that the idea essentially that the world is moving towards a network society will mean that it will be us as part of a global network that will, in a way, partly reshape and redefine the universities. But it's going to be pretty exciting to see, and I want to hear what Matthew has to say about all of this.
Professor Sachs, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Presence.
Peter, thanks a lot.
Congratulations on your award. Thank you for all you do.
And Peter is one of our great leaders of the Earth Institute, and not only is ambassador of Teachers College in the Earth Institute faculty, but is the leader of a great center on international cooperation and conflict resolution, and your work is fabulous.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of the festival.